So again, my name is Dr. Tiffany Maldonado. I am a professor at Sam Houston State University. I'm not associated with Respondent's Lockdown browser at all, but I have used it so many times in my career, not only in the online only environment, but also with hybrid classes and even face-to-face classes. So some of you guys might be wondering, what is Respondent's Lockdown browser and why do you use it, or why do I use it? So Respondent's Lockdown browser pretty much is a custom browser that is on the student's computer screen, and it locks down the testing environment so that way it helps maintain the integrity of the exam. Basically, when a student opens a test within Lockdown browser, they cannot go to any other screen. They can't go to a Microsoft Word file. They can't go to Google, nothing. The only thing in front of them is their test. So during that time, they can't print the test. They may not copy it. They can't search anything. Now, there are two different versions of Lockdown browser. So Respondent's Lockdown browser is one version where you do not need a webcam. Students can take the test and it just stops them from accessing other applications. Respondent's Lockdown browser with monitoring is a step up. So with monitoring, it uses the student's webcam and it records them physically taking the test. When they take the test, the testing software will flag certain events throughout the exam. So maybe if they came out the screen, maybe if another person came in the screen, etc. And those events are flagged. So when you as an instructor, you go in for further review, you're able to see those events and then you're able to make a judgment call upon that. So I was able to get a preview of some of the questions that you guys had about online integrity, about how do you maintain the integrity of a class, etc. So one of the questions was, how do we maintain trust in the student while making sure we're not being like the big brother when it comes to exams? And a lot of professors do wonder, okay, if I use this proctoring software, am I telling my students that I don't trust them to take an exam? Well, it's no different than when they take an exam in class. So online proctor exams are just like taking an exam in class. So in class, the professor or instructor monitors the classroom. They might walk around or sit at the front. With Respondent's Lockdown, the professor then views recordings of the student taking the exam after the exam is submitted. In the classroom with detection, the professor or instructor will step in whenever there's suspicious activity that indicates that the integrity of the exam is compromised. With Respondent's Lockdown, you can view the recorded sessions, and if suspicious activity is indicated, you can then see that. One of the big differences with online versus in the classroom testing is that, excuse me, in the classroom, you have to scan the entire environment. And so while you're looking at one student, you're missing out on another student. With Respondent's Lockdown with browser, excuse me, you're able to see each individual student. And then of course, the final step is that when an instructor sees indication of activities that would compromise the integrity of the exam, then they're able to come in and issue appropriate consequences for those behaviors. So then professors are wondering, well, do I need to watch the entire video for to see what's happening? And you do not. So on the screen now is what you would see as an instructor. And so it will tell you what percentage of the time that the student was facing the webcam, how many flagged events. It actually will prioritize it into a red, yellow, green type system. And then for each flagged attempt, down in the corner underneath the larger video, you will see that they have the actual timestamp of when that event was. And so I circled some of those events. And for this one, the flag was the student was not in view or facial recognition was not available. So you can see that in the first one, the student just disappeared. And you can click on that particular clip of the video and watch that section to see what happened. Maybe it was the student dropped the pen, bent down, picked it up, and it took like 2 seconds. So that's for you as an instructor to determine. Same thing in the bottom corners. Is she looking at her notes? Is she petting her cat? What happened? So you can see each clip in detail when you click on them. So no, you don't have to watch the entire video. Also, just as a reminder, if you do have questions as we go through this conversation, definitely put them in a chat. And so that way, when we have time at the end, I can review them and answer any of your questions at that point. So another question you might have is, how can instructors reconcile the problems of online test proctoring with their benefits? And so there are problems with online proctoring for both the professor and the student. And so I tried to list out some pros and cons. So with professors, you might not trust the online exam proctoring. And even when you have a webcam, some of your thoughts are, well, how can I really tell they're not cheating? I mean, yes, they did an environment scan, but do I really know? And then, of course, we have that responsibility or that desire to maintain the integrity of a test, especially those who use the same test from year to year or slightly tweak it. One of the pros is that, again, like you are able to focus on one student at a time, as opposed to scanning the entire classroom. Now, students, on the other hand, they tend to be more concerned about privacy. What are you going to say about my living conditions? What about like other people in the screen? If they have to use respondents lockdown, some of them just don't like the software. They don't want to take the test that way, especially if they have to use the webcam. Typically, when I am teaching and I have respondents lockdown browser, I encourage them or I assure them that it is a balance of benefits and pros and cons. And so I tell them, you now have the ability to take the exam in a comfortable environment at the time of your choosing. You do not have to stay in these hard chairs inside the classroom. And my classes always typically are lunchtime. So during lunchtime, while your stomach is growling, you can take it at a more convenient and comfortable time where you know you'll be able to focus more. On the other hand, I have to maintain the integrity of the exam. And so with that, I have these principles in place in terms of respondents lockdown browser. So then the question comes up, well, how can we proctor our exams online without students objecting to the invasion of privacy? So typically what I have done is I tell my students, you can take the test anywhere. That includes the campus computer labs or the campus library, because some students may not have webcams on their computers. Some students may not have computers. And so making sure that they understand that there are computer labs on campus or in a campus library that they can utilize. The thing you would need to check on is to ensure that the software is already installed on those computers. I was in a situation one time where I had a student with accommodations, and they would take the test in the disability office lobby, but that computer did not have respondents lockdown browser monitoring installed. And so they had to find another way. So they had to go to the library. It was just a very odd situation, but that one place did not have the computer program installed. Another thing I do when it talks about student privacy is I encourage students to have their back to a wall, just a plain wall. I also reassure my students, no judgment is made. I tell them I don't judge you based off your music choice. So if you choose to play music at an appropriate volume, I don't judge you on that. I don't judge you on what snack you're eating, what drink you're drinking, the room. I do tell them, though, that if you are in a situation where there are other people around, just make sure that they are appropriately clothed And that's from experience. So you learn a couple of things when you see a couple of things. I do tell my students that after the environment scan, that only the immediate background of the student is recorded. So if someone comes in the room and runs across or asks for snacks, no big deal. And then the biggest reassurance I tell my students is that only I can see these videos. They're not going to the dean, they're not going to YouTube or anything like that. It's for me to maintain the integrity of the exam. So with using an online test proctoring software, students can be anxious about it, especially if they've never used it. So how can you accommodate for that anxiety while still maintaining the integrity of the test and academic integrity? What I found works is to just prepare, prepare, prepare. So I provide my students with a practice technology exam. So it basically has one question. It has, who is your professor? It lists me, Professor Snape, and a couple of other Professor X, etc. No, nothing really hard, but it allows them to test out the technology to see, is their webcam working? Do they have the software installed correctly? And so I let them take that. And what I do is I incentivize it. I say, if you take this before the first test, you get extra credit. After the first test, this exam will still be available because you should continue to practice. You should continue to check the technology before you take any tests again. And so I leave it up so they can practice, take the exam before each test. I also explain the benefits to the students that you can take the test at the time of your choosing, in the place of your choosing. Typically, depending on the class, I will have a 1 to 3 day window when it comes to keeping my exam open. I do have an entire slide series about how the technology works and what behaviors are not acceptable. And then I also reassure them that, yes, you might get flagged by the software, but I make the final verdict. And so with that, I want to share a couple of things that I share with my students when I'm trying to ease their anxiety. So the first thing is I share just about the technology and how it works. So the fact that they need a webcam and reliable internet. When I use it with monitoring, which is the webcam, then I let them know that they're being recorded, so dress appropriately. I also tell them no caps or hats because I found that it creates a shadow when you wear it and it's hard to see the student's face. Make sure that lighting is adequate and you can be seen clearly, that you need to have your student ID, and you have to do the environment scan. So I also provide examples of how to appropriately complete an environment scan. So I tell my students that it's a 360-degree video recording of the room. So I need to see all the walls around you. Show me your ceiling and show me your testing surface. So if you're taking it at a desk, show me that. If you're taking it in the bed, show me that. And then YouTube has a lot of tutorials for students on how to appropriately do an environment scan. I would say just browse around there and see one that works for your class. I also tell my students what behaviors are not allowed. So I tell them if you have a double monitor set up, you cannot have that for the test. You can only have one monitor, and that your eyes should be on the monitor that you're taking the test on. I should not see your eyes off to the corner like this as you're trying to take the test. There's no reason for that. I also tell my students that make sure you're clearly visible. I show them this image and I say, okay, one of the reasons why she got flagged at the end was because we only saw her eyes, and that's not appropriate for the software. So make sure your entire face is in full camera view. I also explain some other things that the software will flag. So the software flags for other people in the room. And so I explained to them that as a professor, I will look at the videos. I will be able to tell if it's Beyonce and Taylor Swift are helping you with your test because you have posters on your wall, or if like in my case, as soon as I get ready to do anything with a video, my children come and ask for apple juice. So I will be able to tell if you're saying, no, go away, I'm taking a test, or it's just Beyonce and Taylor Swift helping you out via their posters. I also show them real examples of what is and what is not allowed in terms of behaviors. And I let them know that these are behaviors that I've actually observed in students. So things like talking to your neighbor, getting up to turn on the TV. You shouldn't take a test with the TV on. Using headphones or reading the questions out loud. I let them know that if they want to listen to music, we all will listen to the music. So I have to be able to hear it as well. Going to sleep, using notes of any kind, or leaving to get food. So I do let them know that once you have, thank you, once you have done your environment scan, do not move. But you don't need to stay frozen like this, because some of my students will go to the other extreme. But just don't move from your spot. So make sure you go to the restroom beforehand, have your snacks and your drink right next to you, etc. So that way you don't have to leave for any reason. And another question is that, well, I know about this proctoring technology, but how can I discourage my students from cheating on online exams? I try to make my tests where it's more trouble to cheat than to just take the test. So one of the things I do, and I let my students know, is that your test is open boat, not boat, excuse me, open notes or open book. I tend to do that for my seniors. Some of the younger students, they have to use a webcam. So for my seniors, I let them know that we're not using a webcam, you're using open notes and open book. You can do that with the younger students too, because I found that students, when they have open note, open book exams, those who might be tempted to cheat because they're not prepared will just think, oh, I can just look at the book and find my answers, which that also goes to what type of test questions you decide to put on. I make my test questions applicational. So it requires more of a higher order thinking skill, and the answers can't be Googled. So I do tell my students, my tests are not definitional. I'm not trying to find out if you know the definition of this concept. I want to know, can you apply that concept into with a short example? Another thing I do for my test is that I create random question pools so that each student's exam is different from the others. For those of you who are used to doing the face-to-face test, sometimes you guys have done different versions of tests. So same thing. I tend to over exaggerate for my students, so that way they really are discouraged. I tell them that, okay, this test is only 40 questions, but I've created 200 questions, and it's really closer to like 130. But I created 200 questions, and therefore every student in the class is probably going to have a very different test. So that will address the concerns that a lot of professors have about, well, if I have the testing window open so long, how can I ensure that students are not taking copies and passing it to their friends? And one last thing, I just want you to know that if you decide to add Respondent's Lockdown Browser to your courses, or if you decide not to, it's your choice. This session really was to give you information so that way you can make an informed decision. So at this point, I would like to have whatever questions came up through the chat, if any.
Hi.
Yes.
We have one question right now. There are a lot of comments,
Okay.
and I can give you some, but one question we have is from Stephanie Martin, and she's asking, do you have an exam info sheet with all this information for students?
Yes. So it's a couple of different things I have for my students. I have an entire PowerPoint slide that I go through for my in-class students. For my online students, I record the same PowerPoint. Basically, it's called the exam review or the exam prep, and it gives them all the lowdown on the technology and the software. Additionally, I do have a one-page document on their LMS that reviews it in bulleted form. Like, this is where you go download it. This is where you can find it. What happens if it's asking you for a password? What happens if your computer crashes in the middle of the test? So I do have this information in multiple places.
Thank you. Anne Glazer is saying she joined a little late, so she would like you to repeat what technology you're using for remote proctoring.
Yes. So I use Respondent's Lockdown browser. I also have used Respondent's Lockdown browser with monitoring, which allows you to have the students record themselves. I use that because it's typically free for students. I think ProctorU and a couple of others will charge students. Any other questions or comments that came through?
I'm seeing lots of comments, but let me start from the top. So Stephanie Martin said, I have not had any pushback using Respondus Lockdown with Monitor amazingly since last spring, but definitely some pros and cons.
Okay.
Pamela Rogers says, my students are doing math, so they set off flags constantly because they're looking up and down to write down data or to use their calculators.
Yes, and that's why with the software is not saying this student has compromised the integrity of the exam. What it does is it looks for very specific behaviors that might indicate that the exam has been compromised. And then you as a professor, you go in and you can say, oh, that was just a dog running across the screen, or, oh yes, I allowed them to do open note, open book, and then they see it or they're looking at their calculator.
And then I see there's some recommendations for Pamela by some of the other attendees about what she could do to change the settings so that it doesn't flag the eye movement. So there's a little bit of conversation on the site there. And then, and I think, I'm not sure I have full context to the question. And for the students who are taking it in their car, would you like to expand on that a little bit?
Yes. So, Respondent's Lockdown browser, you have to take it on a computer. I do believe there's an option to allow a student to take it on an iPad. It is not something that they can take on a mobile device.
Okay. And then I think, you know, there is a little bit of an update from Anne about what their students are proposing at their school about moving away from online proctoring. And I think she just wanted to share that information out over here. I'm not sure if you wanted.
Yes, I see that. So a couple of things with that. I found that when students have to use a proctoring software where a person is live watching them, that tends to flag more times because then they can just shut it down. What I also say is that with Respondent's Lockdown, it doesn't say anything. It doesn't determine the gender or anything like that. It doesn't even tell you the student matches the license or the ID. That's for you as the instructor. So the only time I feel like that might be an issue if you have twins taking your course, then yes, that's an issue. Otherwise, you look at the ID and you can tell, yes, this is the student that is enrolled in my course. So Respondent's Lockdown does not kick you out of the program. I'm not too sure about the other programs, but it doesn't. When it comes to gender and race and ethnicity, one of the things that I do tell my students, because Respondent's Lockdown does do this, is that ensure there's adequate lighting and pay attention to your background. If you have lighter skin and you have a lighter background, sometimes the software will flag you as not being there, and vice versa if you have darker skin. But again, I mentioned to them, it is up to me as a professor. So if I open a video I see you. I clearly know that you didn't disappear. It's not an issue. So respondents lockdown is basically like your first run. Um, it doesn't it doesn't tell you this person cheated. You still have to take the data that it gave you and you have to look at it and make a judgment call. Other questions?
I think that's what I've been able to pull together right now.
Okay.
Yeah, it's quite extensive. Irene, did I miss anything?
I think you didn't. I think that's all, unless anybody here had posted a question that was not answered and I would like to raise their hands.
Oh, there's
There is
last
a question here. Yes.
Casey's asking, which company stores the student videos? What cybersecurity certifications are you satisfied with?
I can't say for sure. I know like ours is in our LMS, so I'm assuming it's Blackboard. Because respondents lockdown browser is through Blackboard. At all the schools I taught at, it tends to be on the first screen when you log in that students can download it. Cybersecurity certifications that I'm satisfied with, I'm not quite understanding that question. I think that might be asking a little bit more. Go ahead.
So can I just say that we're at time. So I just wanted to say that Dr. Maldonado said that she can be here for a few more minutes if you still have more questions. So just wanted to give everybody the opportunity to either hop off or stay for a few more minutes for more further clarification if needed. But I wanted to officially end the session and thank everybody for joining and thank Dr. Maldonado for this insightful presentation.